Hey everyone, it's Amir. For all the flaws of Elden Ring's PvP, one of the most frustrating aspects of it is that you can rarely play it in ideal conditions. Let's go over some of the main hurdles causing that. First off is their matchmaking. Their matchmaking system is raw and appears to match you with the first person it finds around the world, seemingly regardless of their connection quality with you. And unless things completely time out for a good while, the game won't do anything to restrict the consequences of such a connection. Speaking of connections, their peer-to-peer networking is badly optimized, and just having players in your world will often inflict a performance hit and cause regular frame drop spikes. Especially on the PC version, which has been notorious for being very unoptimized. Some open world areas can become virtually unplayable with multiple players. On top of that, easy anti-cheat has a hand in impacting performance as well. Here's two identical tests done offline, with and without easy anti-cheat. Luckily, they added the Colosseums in patch 1.08, which by design is the best performing multiplayer accessible area in the game. Unfortunately, it has one big problem. It's way too big for 1v1s. In PvP, rolling and running directly away is very effective against most options players could try and throw at you to keep on pressure. It's also very effective at escaping any tricks you might try and pull in terms of zoning, be it with something as fundamental as the positioning of your character, to something more fancy like careful usage of lingering spells and consumables. This is why if someone doesn't intend in just stalling out the match, if they actually want to consistently win their matches in the Colosseum, they'll probably be using something that thrusts with a lot of reach, forward motion, and damage. I know, those options are often very strong in the first place, but the lack of balance means that players using them will never have to risk moving past their opponent, rather than just directly away. A key weakness of thrusting attacks that you can't properly exploit. Take another strong setup, power stance straight swords. They're strong but are especially easy to stall out with or against in the Colosseum, and while you can certainly use it passively, in an arena with proper boundaries, you'll find that proper usage of them requires their user to be a lot less passive whenever they get the chance to put a player in a corner, or at risk of being cornered themselves. This doesn't mean it isn't effective to play passively in a smaller arena, but it certainly introduces a dynamic where worrying about the space you have matters. If you don't ever attack first, or push into your opponent's space, your opponent will run you down into a corner where you can't simply whiff punish or reaction roll everything they do. I'm not saying smaller arenas magically fix all the balancing issues with the game, but it's far more interesting for everyone if it isn't like this in 1v1s. Trust me. Aside from the size though, you are also limited to playing specific game modes with the arenas, which are mostly copy-pasted from Dark Souls 3. The basic duel game mode is addicting, but let me tell you now, if you care at all about improving your skill in PvP, this isn't the way to go. It's best of one, you have base HP, and no physic. With so little of a buffer for players to figure out their opponent, the better player won't win nearly as often as they should. And for what the arena is, that's completely fine. I love being able to see a new player with an often completely different build nearly every time I hit that Q button. I never feel locked in with somebody I don't enjoy fighting. And that's the thing, Arena is primarily about on-demand casual PvP. But if you've played the Arena in these games, I bet you had a couple of moments where you felt, damn, that was a good fight. I wish I could play that person more. Or, damn, I should have won that, but they got lucky. I hope I can get that guy again. In those moments, it's your competitive itch being scratched. Even if you're more casual, sometimes it's really fun to play the same player for a session. In these situations, what players will often do is add the player they met in an arena on Steam or their console network, and ask if they want to do some fights on the password queue. I've done this quite a bit myself, and a lot of the people I know in the community I originally met through doing this very thing, and pointing them to the relevant discords and such. However, these sessions are still less than ideal. You still have a pretty low health pool, downtime between duels is very high, and you're still stuck playing exclusively in this wide open arena. You could of course summon by red sign, but as those playing before the introduction of the Colosseums will remember, red summoning is arguably worse. During the first few months of Elden Ring's release, there was a significant struggle on finding a one-size-fits-all arena to do PvP duels. There are a lot of spots players can name as being decent, but they all have at least a few issues. Bad performance, ugly, too big, random objects in the way, bothersome enemies to clear, lacking corners, water that buffs lightning damage and nerfs fire damage, long run back from grace, or even the area being inaccessible depending on if you burn the Erd tree or not. And don't underestimate the significance of these differences. I remember I had a session with one of the better players, and my win rate on the same matchup plummeted once we moved to a better performing spot, as he could more consistently reaction roll my attacks. This is also not to mention the awkwardness of randomly matching with players for duels. Initially, the only popular spot was the first step, which with the initial PC performance there, lack of bounds and uneven terrain, it was just, yeah. A bit more in, and content creators were able to push people to move to main academy gate. A bit better in terms of performance and area dimensions. But when it came to actually summoning random people, you had to rely on community peer pressure to make sure people followed decent duel rules in the first place. Hosts would often summon you with a rune archon, or spam buffs before you can get in. Reds would often sometimes attack you while their invincibility is still active, or run out of the arena bounds when they're losing. And don't get me started with people healing or kicking you out with the finger sever when they were losing. Okay, but nobody random matchmakes with red sign anymore anyway, so let's move on. It was fun to reminisce on the history though. Going back to the subject of the Colosseums, you may know of the Combat Ordeal and United Combat modes, which are both basically a time deathmatch mode. One being for free-for-all and one being for teams. Interestingly, you can queue 1v1 in both these modes, and it's effectively the same thing. The main advantage of this mode for 1v1s is that after someone dies, you don't need to wait like 42 seconds before you get to fight again, only about 15. While they're fun for what they are, don't queue 1v1 format and expect fair duels, as it's still a deathmatch mode where all that matters is that you have a lead, and retain that lead. In 1v1s where there isn't anyone else to kill or worry about defending, it's stupidly easy to stall. Okay, but let's say you're playing with a friend that you can negotiate some rules with, and try to work around how this game mode is engineered to have some fair duels instead of a constant stream of respawning and resource management. But you'll find that it isn't as easy as it may seem. When a player dies, it doesn't always mean that the other player will have their status and resources restored. So there isn't really a way to guarantee that both players start the duel with equal status and resources. There's also a fixed 5-minute timer to worry about. You may find yourself near the end of a high-intensity duel where the score is 2-2 and cease combat. With all those hurdles to having quality 1v1s in mind, what if I told you there was a way to play with all of them almost entirely solved? Excellent performance, pretty and competitively viable arenas, graces usable during multiplayer, no restrictions on what items you can use, 3-second downtime, no easy anti-cheat, and a bunch of quality of life features on top of that. You can bring a copy of your original characters to the mod without modifying the original. This also doesn't prevent you from launching the vanilla game whenever you want, and it also doesn't pose a risk to banning you online. All with an installation that should take less than 15 minutes. It's the perfect way to have extended PvP sessions with friends, to host fight clubs, and to organize tournaments. And I'm going to show you how to install and use this mod, every step of the way. But first, let me explain what this mod is. If you don't care and want to learn how to install it now, skip to this timestamp. And additionally, if you're thinking right now, okay, but this requires friends to play with in the first place, I'm sorry. Okay, but no, if you want to find people or events you can play with on these maps, you can skip to this timestamp where I point you in the right direction. The Den Maps is a mod that was built to be used alongside the Seamless Co-op mod, which is an overhaul for the game's multiplayer that allows players to connect directly instead of through the developer's matchmaking server. Seamless Co-op is primarily intended for cooperative multiplayer, but it's just as easy to play PvP with it. The Maps mod itself comprises of 5 custom maps, most of which were made by Notshell with the primary purpose of using them as the gold standard for the Den's PvP events. We'll talk about them more later, and how you can watch and participate in them. The mod also comprises some additional items, which are intended to be used exclusively for eliminating the downtime and hurdles of playing PvP duels. With these items in use, here's typically how dying and resetting for the next fight looks in my average PvP session. Catch that? The dead player was revived immediately, just having to wait 3 seconds in this animation, while the winner used an item called Regressive Grease that completely restores them. Both upon revival and the use of that item, players are fully restored to their natural state. HP, FP, and poise health is entirely restored, while buffs, status effects, and other modifications are cleared. You can personally toggle on this revival effect through an item called Braid of America. Keep in mind, it will not save you from falling off the map. There's a third item called Jar of Plenty, which is a bottomless pot that you can toggle on to prevent the expenditure of your limited items. If you can expect your friend not to drink their physic a second time, or do nothing but throw daggers at you the entire fight, then this can be a useful feature that eliminates the hassle of the need to return to the Grace to refill your consumables, or the need to disable PvP so you can restore your stock of pots and aromatics. Obviously, if you're hosting a tournament, fight club, or any other kind of PvP event, be sure to restrict the usage of these items in line with whatever you have in mind for your specific event. For example, you'd probably want to prohibit the usage of regressive grease during the match, but depending on your preference, you may be okay with the usage of Braid of America, as dying with it active can be counted as a normal round loss. And of course, you might want to restrict Jar of Plenty like we talked about before. Alright, but you're probably curious about what the maps themselves have to offer. As said before, there's 5 total. They all feature 1 to 3 arenas each, 1 to 2 graces, teleporters to all other maps, starting buttons, and a lot of decorations and attention to detail. Some maps have special features like a jousting list, parkour, and a personal weather toggle. All of them are initially accessible through the roundtable hold in this spot. Each map has a one-of-a-kind arena shape, and notably the shape of each teleporter stone corresponds with the map it takes you to. You can pick and choose according to your taste, preference, and game mode. If you're hosting a fight club, you may want to choose an arena with 2 or 3 arenas, so people don't need to wait for their turn to fight. Just make sure that everyone who comes in rests at the Grace at least once, and doesn't teleport to a different map from where everyone else is. This is because the game doesn't take too kindly to people being in different maps in the same multiplayer session. If you get this problem, it can easily be fixed by having the players warp back to the same map, or by having the desync player leave and rejoin. With all that said, I could go into the individual details, but there's a lot more info on the Nexus page as well as the maps themselves for you to explore yourself. So let's get into the install guide. Now I know a lot of people get overwhelmed when it comes to installing mods, so I'm going to take it a step at a time here. And you can feel free to pause the video or go back or do whatever. If you find it easier to follow guides in text, you can read the step-by-step guide on the Nexus page. In the description I'll also link a troubleshooting video on my second channel that should be up alongside this one, going into more specific detail into specific questions or problems you may have with the install. You might also find it useful if you have certain questions about managing mods in general. First things first, if you already have Seamless installed normally, you'll still need to follow the step of installing Seamless with this mod. Seamless's launcher launches itself and the game through the game folder. But we want to launch both Seamless and the Den Maps mod, so we'll be using Mod Engine 2 to do this. Use the link I provided for Mod Engine 2 in the description, find the latest version, download the release zip. You can then unpack the zip anywhere, including leaving it in your downloads. When launched, Mod Engine 2 finds Steam and your Elden Ring install for you, so it doesn't matter where it is. Next, use the link I provided to the Seamless Co-op Nexus page or GitHub releases page, and download the main file, which at the time of making this video is version 1.5.1. Unless 2.0 or a later version has been updated to support other mods, which it isn't at the time of making this video, so you'll want to stick to 1.5.1. 2.0 introduced a 128 player cap, which is only possible through the use of Seamless's launcher due to a technical limitation with achieving that cap. Alright, so once you've downloaded Seamless and unzipped it, you'll find a folder in there called specifically Seamless Co-op with no space or dash in between it. And you're going to want to copy that specifically into your Mod Engine 2 install folder, on the same level that the Mod Engine 2 exe is. This is where Mod Engine 2 will load Seamless itself, and where Seamless will look for its configuration file. This next step you can skip if you've already installed this version of Seamless the normal way. Copy the Seamless Co-op folder and paste it into your game directory, where you can find through Steam by right-clicking Elden Ring, Manage, Browse Local Files, and going to the game folder. This is where Seamless will find its language and crash logging files, and they specifically need to be here or Seamless won't load. The other files you can delete from here if you want, it doesn't really matter. Alright, now that we got those in, it's time to download the Den Maps themselves. Use the link I provided in the description to the Nexus page or GitHub Mirror, and download the latest release. Unzip this and drag all its contents into your Mod Engine 2 install. From here, you have everything you need to play. Double-clicking this batch file will run this configuration through Mod Engine 2, which instructs it to launch Elden Ring with Seamless and the Den Maps DLL, as well as the Den Maps game files. You can always launch the vanilla game by launching Elden Ring through Steam normally. Whenever you want to play this mod, you'll have to launch it through this file. Alright, now that we have the mods installed, it's time to make a copy of our vanilla save to play on Seamless. If you have any concerns with save managing, watch the troubleshooting guide video I mentioned earlier. There I explain it entirely. Search %appdata%, navigate to the Elden Ring folder, and to the folder representing your Steam account. Make a copy of the file named er000.sl2 and change its extension to .co2. Alright, now that you have your mod installed and your save set up, how do you play with your friends? First, you'll need to set your password. Navigate to the Seamless Co-op folder inside your Mod Engine 2 folder and open up the .ini file with your text editor of choice. Set the password to whatever you like, but try to keep it unique so you don't accidentally get another party. I'd also recommend you set the player HUD setting to 2 so you can check your ping with your peers. Keep in mind, this only shows while PvP is off. Once that's done, you can launch the game through the batch file. You should see Seamless Co-op on the title screen, as well as gain these items if you did things right. Some of these are from Seamless, some of these are from the Den Maps mod. To get to the arenas, travel to the round table hold and walk up to this balcony. There should be teleporter stones to each of the maps. Once you've teleported to an arena, you can unlock its graces and teleport to them at any time using your map. If you're intending to host the session, you'll want to use the Tiny Great Pod item to open your world. If you're joining someone else's session, you'll want to use the Effigy of Melania item instead. You can use the Separation Mist item to close or disconnect from a session at any time. To enable PvP, the host will have to use the item Judicator's Rulebook and choose the options that sets the players to hostile. And from here, you can toggle on Revival or Unlimited Consumables with the items I mentioned earlier, and hop into the arena to play as much PvP as you like. If you want to switch to a different arena, players will simply need to use the teleporters to get there. Okay, that includes all the basics to playing friendlies with this mod. Now onto the part of the video where I point you in the right direction on how to find people to play with and events to play in. The PvP community is split pretty wide across various Discords, Steam groups, and Twitch channels, but by far the biggest community on Discord is the Elden Ring PvP Discord server. It's a place where you can find people to PvP with on all platforms, in casual play, fight clubs, and of course, the competitive ladder. You can find very easy access to PvP tools, resources, and references, as well as find answers to any questions you may have. At the top, you can also find an event list to find where to watch and sign up for upcoming tournaments, and other events like Taunter's Tongue Runs and streamed fight clubs. At the moment, there's a couple tournaments coming up, such as the one on the 22nd, where you can only use starting classes. There's also the monthly competitive tournaments occurring on the 29th and 30th. All of these will be hosted on the Den's Twitch channel. Speaking of, what's the Den? It's short for Duelist Event Network, which is a group of community players who intend to host clean, entertaining, and professional Elden Ring tournaments, and other PvP-related events. Mostly, they've been broadcasting the Tournament League of Elden Ring PvP. You can see all the recent tournaments they've done on the Den VOD's YouTube channel. One thing I'm actually proud of is the automatic spectator cam and tournament hosting tools that I've developed with my peers, which have really given these tournaments a degree of quality that hasn't been seen before in the Soul series. There's a lot more we could potentially do in terms of multiplayer mods, and I might talk about that more later. On that note, it's worth mentioning that these events and all the mods and systems to support it are only thanks to an outstanding community-driven effort, and currently most of that effort is being put on by a very small selection of passionate players. Now, it's not like this game is lacking passionate players, we just need to find the ones who are interested in helping out. Also, to provide an update on a related issue, if you're wondering what happened to the feedback project, we made a lot of additional progress, especially with the people who volunteered. But it had to be put on the back burner as we had to pick up the ball with the tournament scene. Now, if you want to get onto that, and if I want to get into my other projects, we'll just need to find a couple more people who can organize, cast, and run these events self-sufficiently with our existing tools and assets. And if you want to be one of those people, just send either me or Notshell a Discord DM after joining the Elden Ring PvP Discord server. We should be able to give you any training or direction you need in whatever you'd like to do. But That's all I'm going to be covering in this video. If you found it insightful or helpful, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. And consider subscribing to me on Patreon if you would like to join the lovely people on screen.